Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 to Sirius XM. Sean Haney, your host here on this Wednesday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. It is great to have you here today. Of course, also a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Well, I'm broadcasting today from the home studio in Lethbridge, Alberta. It is great to be home. And Western Canada proven we have turned to winter. I have been in it's only Wednesday. And I have this week, I've been in Ottawa, Winnipeg, Regina, and now back in Lethbridge. So I've covered the gamut of a lot of the markets that we talk to here on a daily basis on RealAg Radio. And Ottawa, a lot warmer than anything I saw in Winnipeg, Regina, or Lethbridge here today, or this week. Wow, she is chilly out there. Hey, if you have any feedback on today's program, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms as Real Agriculture. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line. Why not do that? Drop us a line, 855-776-6147. We got a bit of a special treat for you here today on yesterday. I was at Agribition, which is a fantastic event. It not only is it an economic driver in the city of Regina, it's a great showcase of the cattle industry, and there's a lot of business that happens at Agribition for sure. There's also a grain expo that happens, and I was invited to do a fireside chat, we'll call it, a one-on-one conversation, an interview, so to speak, with former British Columbia Premier Christy Clark. And she was in Regina this week. She was speaking at she spoke at a women's event on Tuesday night. There's a couple other things I think she did as well. But I was quite honored, especially with all the things that are happening from an economic standpoint, trade, politics, lots of talk about how do we develop the resources of Canada. These are all things that Christy Clark has keen insights into. And I had a really great time and really enjoyed our conversation off stage. I've never met Ms. Clark before, but I would say that we had a really great time in the interview. And so what we're going to do here today is we're going to play that for you, at least the bulk of it. And I want to say that today's show is brought to you by Resurge from Helena Products Group. And big shout out to Helena and the entire team there, doing some great work, some great products for farmers, not only in Canada, but of course the United States as well. I want you to make sure that if you are thinking about a humic, you are thinking about Resurge. And you can find out more by going to the website, www.helenaagra.com. Okay? That's Resurge from Helena Products Group. Today's show is brought to you by them. And of course, Christy Clark was brought on stage by the firm that she works for, Bennett Jones. So a shout out to them as well. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll play the interview with former BC Premier Christy Clark. Today's show is brought to you by Resurge from Helena Products Group.
Joining me now with Genesis Fertilizers, Terry Drabuc. Now, in times of high demand, Western Canadian farmers often face price pressure from U.S. buyers because of that competition. How does Genesis Fertilizers plan to alleviate that competitive pressure and create more secure supply for Western farmers?
Well, we don't plan on lowering the price. So the model is around the investor farmers paying exactly what they would pay today. So we would be competitive in that high sales, low manufacturing costs. We plan on giving giving the profit back to the farmer as close to the cost of production as we possibly can. So they're entitled to the product and they get the profit from the product. And we call it a closed loop system, which is actually really critical. It's unlike any other model that you can see around the world, because as the owners, they're also the ones who will take the product from the plant.
For anyone who's interested, how Genesis Fertilizers plans to deliver this, where can they go?
The best place is our website, genesisfertilizers.com.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Resurge from Helena Products Group. And like I mentioned, you can find out more by going to helenaagra.com. You can also talk to your local retailer about Resurge. Let's get started with my interview with former British Columbia Premier Christy Clark from the Grain Expo at Agribition. Walking around the grounds here. First of all, have you ever been to Agribition before?
I have never been here. I want the belt buckle.
Well, so we were backstage of what we'll call the green room, and I heard a rumor that you at one time sold semen. Now, we're at Agribition, so please do tell. What was going on?
I think a lot of people here have sold semen, but when I had never done it. I was at a fundraiser in Williams Lake. I'm up there on the stage, and the MLA that we were fundraising for was a farmer. He's a rancher. And so we had some high grade semen to sell, and it was my job to sell it. The part of it that was kind of unusual is that my co-host in doing the auction was a guy named Mike DeYoung, and he was my finance minister. He's actually running as a conservative candidate in the upcoming federal election. And he was up there and he was selling a whip. So I'm standing up there with like a bucket of ice with some semen in it. And Mike has got the whip and he's whipping it out into the crowd to try and get them to increase the bidding on the semen. So, that's what you do in politics. You gotta find a way to get some money. You want it to be legitimate. And if you have to whip people into buying the semen, that's what you'll do. And we got top right. It was the number one item we sold that day.
Absolutely. Cool stuff. Okay. Lots happening in the area of politics and trade. I don't think we can go very far in our discussion here without maybe addressing kind of the big elephant in the room, and maybe the elephant in the economic scene, being that elephant. As we heard yesterday, the incoming Trump administration, 2 months away from inauguration, 2 months away, saying they're going to put 25% tariffs on all goods coming out of Canada and Mexico into the United States. Do you see this as, is this a lot of bluster, or is there potential bite here for Canada?
I think it's both. The way I think about President Trump, and we've all seen him, we all know him well enough, I think, that you can see him just kind of walking around saying, guess what, guys? I got elected again. I can do whatever I want. And I think he's not just enjoying this moment by making some unusual nominations, some of whom will never make it through Senate process. He just wants to make a point that he's back, he's big, and he's going to go big. I think that's true about the trade negotiations too. I think over the next little while, we're going to see a lot of focus on Mexico, probably less on Canada. So I think there's definitely some bluster there, but I think he wants to make sure that we all know this isn't going to be easy. And of course it isn't. This is how he's built his business and his life. You never start low. And if you read his book,
I did, actually.
Yeah, he talks about that, how he learned you never start with a low bid. You always start high, and then you work your way down from there. So not without potential for real pain for Canada, but maybe we could talk a little bit, Sean, about where why I don't think it's going to be as painful as it seems to be, and I certainly don't think it's going to be the kind of number he's talking about.
Okay, well, why do you think it's not going to be painful?
Well, I don't think it'll be entirely without pain, but I do think, here we are, in Western Canada, we produce a lot of inputs for production in the United States, and we have a pretty healthy trade balance when it comes to agriculture. We out-export them in the West on beef, but we import a lot of beef in the East. You look at the trade balance. There's a lot in it for them that evens it up. And then no one wants to take the elements of production and make them more expensive in the U.S. The third thing I would say is you've got a lot of folks from border states with whom we interact a lot in a very integrated market in agriculture and in automotive, who don't want to upset that balance of trade, because everything you do and everything that they do depends on that whole system staying whole. So I don't think they have a lot of incentive to do it. And the last thing is, if he was to put the tariffs that he's talking about on Canada tomorrow, within 3 days, you would see food prices in the United States for many, many, many items go up by 25%. And one of the main reasons, and there were a lot, that the Democrats couldn't win this election is because people were still feeling inflation. And I think President Trump, he is cagey, and he understands that if he does anything that's going to bump up inflation for people, especially at the supermarket, it's a losing proposition for him.
Well, I'll give you a Saskatchewan example where we do have leverage. About a month ago, I toured the Nutrien Allen mine, the potash mine, outside of Saskatoon. And I learned, for example, U.S. farmers, huge purchasers of Saskatchewan potash. 87% of the potash that is used in the United States comes from Saskatchewan. And you can't relocate a potash mine, right? Those deposits are 360 million years old. So it's not like we can relocate an auto plant or a manufacturing facility. A potash mine, it's in Saskatchewan. They just kind of built, when they put the borders of Saskatchewan up, they sort of built it, put the border around the potash deposit. It's very convenient for y'all. And so there's an example of a product in farm country with an electoral college where there's no way they're putting a 25% tariff on Canadian potash, unless they're saying we're going to buy it all from Russia, and I don't see them doing that.
No, I don't either. You think about all of the energy exports that we have with the U.S. Could they replace oil and gas, for example, if there was a huge tariff put on Canadian oil and gas going over the border? I don't think they can, because we all live along the border and we produce these items along the border, and so the transportation cost from Canada is negligible compared to the transportation costs for oil and gas, for example, coming from other countries. So they need what we have. We need what they have. It's been a long and increasingly complex relationship that we've built, and I just don't see this bluster coming to Canada in a big way. They're going to make it painful at the beginning. There's no doubt about it. That's the way President Trump likes to negotiate. Yeah. I just think we should keep in mind that longer term, I don't think this is going to be something we should be overly concerned about.
Yeah, what you said, but I really agree with, is Canada's problems aren't Mexico's problems. And so if you look at illegal immigrants, for example, last year there was 10,000 illegals that crossed from Canada into the U.S. There's more than that a day at times on the southern border. Now, what about the issue, before we move on to some other countries, what about the issue around drugs and fentanyl going across the border? That's something that probably a lot of Canadians weren't aware of, and it's hard to get your head wrapped around the significance of it.
Yeah, fentanyl is a huge problem in cities all over North America. We all know that. They are, though, I think, still a lot more concerned about the drugs that are coming across the border from Mexico. There is a lot of the molecules that go to make fentanyl and crystal meth come from Asia through our ports into Canada and into the U.S. But when I see President Trump talking about illegal aliens and drugs and Mexico, I just don't think he's thinking about Canada as a target for any of that stuff.
I agree with you. I agree. Okay, domestic politics, which I know you've spent a career in. The current polls show that the Conservatives are up by 22 points. Abacus Data had that number last week. It is pretty well steadily increased from 18 months ago. When do you think we're going to have an election? Are we going to hold out to October of 25?
Yeah.
You do?
I do. I think it's going to be October 2025. And the reason I think that is because when you look at the legislative calendar now at this point, there are really only 2 points where they could feasibly call an election, or where the opposition could force an election, and that would be May and September 2025. And it appears like the NDP and the Liberals have renewed their coalition agreement, or their supply agreement, whatever they call it. And if that's the case, then the election will be at the fixed election date.
You've been listening to my conversation with the former Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark. When we come back, I'm going to ask her, okay, when we have an election in Canada, will the leader of the Liberal Party be Prime Minister Justin Trudeau or somebody else? You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Resurge from Helena Products Group.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
Here's what Wheat Pete's word on RealAgriculture.com is all about in under 30 seconds.
It's wheat time. I love wheat time. I love wheat. Get that sulfur on. Get that seeding rate right. Get that nitrogen on your wheat right. Get that protein. Know your variety. Know when you need to put fungicides on. Pick your product. Pick your rate. Do the right job. Get this wheat crop right. Have a nice day. Grow amazing wheat.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Resurge from Helena Products Group. You can find out more by going to helenaagra.com. We've been talking to Christy Clark, former Premier of British Columbia. This was recorded this week on Tuesday at the Grain Expo at Agribition. And continuing the conversation, I asked former Premier Clark, okay, so if we are going to have to wait for an election till October of 25, will it be Justin Trudeau running for the Liberals or somebody else?
And do you see the current Prime Minister being the leader heading into that election?
I do. He says...
So you see him going down with the ship?
Well...
I use those words, not Christy Clark.
Yeah, he is determined to run in this election. And he said that many, many times. I believe him. And, the thing about Prime Minister Trudeau that many people don't appreciate is he's never lost an election. He's the only Prime Minister in Canadian history who's never lost any kind of election. So one of them has always lost a leadership, or they've lost a riding, or they've lost something in the course of their political career. Justin Trudeau has never lost anything. And I think he's pretty determined to go out in this campaign, and he is determined to see if he can win it.
Will Parliament be able to accomplish anything in the meantime? Because we're really just stuck here right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, there might be some people in this room who would say when the government isn't doing anything, that's better than the government doing something. But realistically, it's been, if you look at it from a nonpartisan perspective, this has been one of the worst parliaments we've seen in a long time, because it's just been so divided and so angry. And I don't think in my lifetime I've ever seen our parliament so incapable of finding common ground or compromise on any issue. And some of these things that, you know, they do on a daily basis are kind of obvious, but people are just refusing to do them. And it's not one side or the other. I just think it's such a poisonous environment. And I really worry about the impact that that has on our society in general, because, you know, politicians, when they refuse to do anything or agree with each other or model good behavior, I think it has a corrosive effect on us across the country in a million small ways that we don't even think about. And I worry about that.
For people that haven't been in politics, it just looks from the outside right now. It's a really toxic. You know, you're putting your family through a lot of criticism and critique and the microscope. There's, you know, people saying a lot of not very nice stuff about you. Right? That was one of the issues with Rona Ambrose, for example, why she sort of backed away and is doing different things. Give us some insight here in behind the curtain. What is it like? And what are some of the characteristics that it takes for an individual to be very successful in today's environment as a politician?
You have to not be hurt by the things that people say about you. And I would say that's certainly always been true, but in this era of social media, it is super toxic out there. I think Rana would agree. It is a lot harder for women because so much of the conversation is not about what you say, it's about what you look like. It's about the way you talk. It's about the way you change your, color your hair or whatever. Like dumb things that are totally distracting from all of the things that you want to do. But it's true for men too. I mean, it's not like men get let off the hook in politics either. It's really, you have to focus every day on the things that you're trying to do, and remember that you're trying to do the good for the public, and that makes it worth putting up with the criticism. But I mean, it's just like what we say to our kids all the time. As a mom, when your kids come home from school and they were bullied, what do you say? I mean, what do you say, Alana? You say, suck it, just don't believe what people say about you, son. Don't believe that what they think is about you, what they think is about what's going on inside of them. And my approach to politics was to try and remember that all the time. But I mean, we've got some former fantastic politicians in the room here, I think, would agree with me that it isn't easy. It's not a job for everybody.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's what I always say to people. No, thank you. But I appreciate the perspective indeed. Okay, so we've talked about some of the domestic things. We've talked from a political perspective. We've talked about the U.S. India. That's a trading partner that this province is exceptionally interested in. We have a very fragmented, if you want to put it that way, or difficult relationship with India right now, as Canada. Is there easy solutions, or what do you think Canada should be doing to rectify some of the harsh feelings between the two countries?
Well, I mean, it's tragic that this relationship has gone south. I mean, Brad Wall and I did so many trade missions together to China, I think we did a couple to India together, and Hong Kong, places around the world, to, understanding that it's vitally important for us to diversify our markets, and those markets hold so much potential for us. But we have to enforce the law in Canada, and foreign interference is a really serious issue for us. And you think about the work that the Russians are doing around the world to try and influence elections. We see that happening from foreign actors all over the place. And in this case, it's the accusation of an extrajudicial killing on our soil. I mean, we have to take that seriously in this country.
Real.
It's real. And it's an example of how, just like the two Michaels in China, how sometimes issues are, diplomatic issues. I mean, I don't want to suggest that a crime on Canadian soil is simply a diplomatic issue. But ultimately, our diplomatic relations break down, our trade relations go with it. But I do think we'll find a way to repair it. I think we will find a way out of this because India needs Canada and Canada needs India. And these things, like they have with China, they do always settle down.
Is it one of those situations where the diplomatic environment is very frosty, but business is still happening between companies between the two countries, or is that simplifying it too much?
I think it's a little both. I think, the diplomatic relations, particularly with the Indian situation we're in now, the Indian government is very hostile about Canada's response to this. And so that, we're seeing that play out in a less receptive audience for our trade goods. There's no doubt about it. And we China does the same game a lot, and other countries around the world. So I think we're just going to have to cool our jets a little bit and wait for it to settle down. But I think that it will, because I think that there's need on both sides. And at the end of the day, we have a lot in common with India. We have a huge Indian diaspora here. English is the language of business in India. The rule of law applies in India. And they are a huge growing middle class that requires more nourishment. There is just so much that we have in common. And I think at the end of the day, once we're past this really difficult period, it'll settle out. And I think we can hope that one day relations will be back to normal.
Will a change in leadership in Canada or India kind of be a bit of a change up, and is that an opportunity for improvement?
I don't know that it necessarily would be. Okay. The facts are the facts, and this is an issue of Canada enforcing the law in our territory and India not liking what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I couldn't foresee any government taking over in Canada that might take a different approach to that.
Right.
Because the rule of law is the rule of law.
Yeah, unless they took a position that was going to be very uncomfortable in Canada.
You can't tell other countries in the world that you'd like them to enforce the rule of law in their own nation when we're not doing it here.
Yeah. What's a more difficult trading relationship right now, India or China?
Oh, I think probably India at the moment. Okay. But I'm not on the inside of that. But I think probably. Yeah. And, the thing about India, though, as I said, I think that there's a lot of grounds to see a solution at the end of it.
I always say that if you don't like trade with China, let me introduce you to their neighbor, India, which is maybe sometimes a little bit more complicated from a trade perspective.
Yeah, but, India is not one country. Think about this. I remember being on the stage debating the importance of lower taxes in India with the chief minister for Kerala province. And I'm sitting there on the stage with this guy. He's got like 40 million people that he represents, and he's one state in India. And I represent 4 million. And I'm arguing about how we need lower taxes and how that's a great way to stimulate the economy. And when you reflect on that, how many states there are in India, it is an incredibly diverse country. And each of those states has a very, very big influence within its own borders. So I think, when we approach trade with China or India or any of those other very large countries, it's really important to recognize you want to go at the state-by-state level as much as you possibly can.
Okay, so let's talk about China. What's different a little bit about China is that Canada's a little bit more in this triangular relationship a little bit between the U.S., ourselves, and China. You referenced the two Michaels, which is, of course, that situation was rectified. How would you describe the trading relationship right now between Canada and China?
It's improving, for sure. I think the American approach to it will matter for Canada because, of course, the reason that they are going after Americans are going after Mexico in the trade negotiations as a principal opponent is because they are accusing the Chinese or the Mexicans of hosting Chinese businesses in Mexico and using that as a way to get around tariffs and other trade barriers that America puts on China. They do not want to see Canada become a Mexico kind of, a door into the United States as a way to evade tariffs. So they worry about that. I don't think it's a significant a potential problem, but I know it's something that's on their minds as they think about this stuff.
Yeah, often called nearshoring.
Yes.
And in the first Trump administration, that's how the U.S. justified putting tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from Canada. They claimed national security, but they were concerned about Chinese steel coming in through Canada into the U.S. There's been a significant bump in the amount of Chinese EVs and autos that are coming from China to Mexico or manufactured in Mexico and ending up in the U.S. It's been a very significant bump. And this is what Premier Ford was talking about.
Yeah.
The back door.
Yeah. But I mean, it is a different issue in Ontario than it is in Western Canada, because in Ontario, it's easy to get steel from the United States. In Western Canada, it's really expensive to get steel if you're in British Columbia, all the way across the country. So there's another problem there. If you want to raise the cost of housing and you want to raise the cost of building and manufacturing in Western Canada, we need to find a way to get steel that's at an affordable price.
We'll continue my conversation with the former Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark, when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Resurge from Helena Products Group. I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. You've been listening to my conversation with the former Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark. Today's show is brought to you by Resurge from Helena Products Group. You can go to helenaagra.com and search up Resurge, a great product. It's a humic that is different than the rest, indeed. Okay, let's continue the conversation with Christy Clark, former Premier of British Columbia.
Speaking of Bennett Jones and some of the work that you do with them, infrastructure and national resources is something you're very passionate about and do a lot of work in. What are your thoughts on the feasibility at this point of Canada being able to think big and do large infrastructure projects like things like Keystone XL or Energy East or TMX is a very important pipeline when it comes to British Columbia, your home province. Can we think big like that on infrastructure these days?
Yes, I think we can. I did when we signed off on TMX when I was actually one of the very first things that I did when I became Premier was sign off on the approval to harmonize our regulatory process for it. And we got it. And TMX, we saw our GDP tick up the first day that we started shipping without, to markets outside the U.S. So that's hugely important for our standard of living here. We did LNG. Nobody ever heard of liquefied natural gas in Canada before we started it in 2011. And LNG Canada is going to start shipping in 2025. So we got that done. We built a dam, which I think it's just about to open. W.A.C. Bennett envisaged it in the 1950s or 60s, and we got it off the books and into production and started building it when I was a Premier, and it's going to be powering over 1,000 homes pretty soon. So we can do these things, absolutely. The challenge we have with all of this stuff, though, is that the regulatory environment is becoming so hostile to the creation of wealth and resource development. And we have to find a way to reduce the regulatory environment and change the taxation environment so that it starts to encourage people to start investing again. Because our standard of living is linked to our productivity. Our productivity is linked to the level of investment that we have. in the private sector. And as, if you scare all that investment away because your regulatory environment, your tax environment are so hostile, our standard of living is going to continue to fall. And that is, I don't believe that government creates wealth. The private sector creates wealth, but government can enable or inhibit the creation of wealth through regulation and taxation. And that's what we need to take on, because government plays a huge role in the economy through through taxation and regulation. And I don't think we have the balance right.
And when you say regulation, you mean environmental regulations, or are there others?
All regulation. I mean, there's a million different ways you can do that. I think there's a way to do lots of great environmental regulation, which can stimulate the economy. But you have to, I'll give you a good example of that. When you have to take a resource project, and LNG got stuck in this. We were doing a full provincial review of LNG that had been approved by the federal government, and it was harmonized. They said, we think your process is good, so we don't think we have to do another one. Then they changed it and they deharmonized it. So every project that we did had to go through a provincial review and then had to go through a very similar federal review. And that's just one kind of regulation. And that's not just environmental review. That's a million different other things that they're looking at. And the scope of it is massive. The time it takes is forever. And we should be building mines in Canada, or starting, you shouldn't take 13 years to approve a mine getting opened in this country. We do mining better than anybody else in the world. Our workers all go home safe at the end of every day. We've got the strongest environmental legislation you can imagine. And we get rich as a country because we take resources out of the ground and off the ground. So let's find a way to make that work faster. And that's something that is entirely within government's control. And, I just don't think it should be so hard to create wealth in Canada, because that's how we, if you care about healthcare, you got to care about private sector creating wealth.
Oh, don't get me started on healthcare.
Wow.
Well, we might have to go there.
No.
But from on that, okay, so I appreciate all those comments. How do we get ourselves in this bind when it comes to over-regulating ourselves so we can't attract investment, we can't get projects done, or it becomes difficult to get projects done, and it takes this incredible intestinal fortitude for companies or leaders to push it through and make it happen? How do we get ourselves in this bind, this situation?
Because we don't set standards and timelines for these things to be done. You should say, which we did, you should say, here's from the date you put your application in, we're going to take this many days until we tell you yes or no, period. That's it. We're not going to go over that date. And everyone in the civil service who was looking at all of the different aspects of something would know what their timeline was, and they had to perform and they had to meet that timeline. And if we were finding our timeline slipping, we would go and we would look at why they were slipping. And sometimes people would find themselves doing something else, because certainty for investors is the single most important determinant of whether they will put their money in Canada. And if we want to attract that dollar from around the world, then we need to be able to offer regulatory certainty in the timeline and taxation certainty over the length of the project. And we've injected so much uncertainty through those processes over the last many years that we have become, in the minds of investors, a very risky place to put their money. And it's so frustrating, because you see it here. We have so much wealth on and under the ground. We have so much left that we can contribute to the world, and we're not doing it because we're getting in our own way too much.
Yeah, when I was at that Nutrien Island potash mine, they talked about a couple hundred years of reserves, right? So, and just that one mine is loading 100 rail cars of potash per day. Just think about that kind of wealth.
If we had 5 world-class sized LNG plants in British Columbia working all the time at absolute maximum, we would have enough natural gas to do that for 130 years. That's how much natural gas. That's just in BC. It doesn't count the rest of the Peace Country that's in Alberta. We have so much resources in this country that we have the opportunity to share with the world. And, it might be in 130 years, nobody's using natural gas anymore. But, people need it now. It cuts emissions by 40% when it's replacing thermal coal. We can make a big contribution to solving global climate change, and we can make a lot of money to support healthcare in this country.
Okay, so you mentioned healthcare twice. We get to go there. Provincial responsibility, but there is money that comes from the feds. There's somewhere between 20 and 30% of Canadians that don't have access to a family doctor, depending on which report you read. Yet, it seems, as Canadians, we are unwilling to have the conversation about how we fix healthcare. I've always thought it's because we jump to, well, we don't want the American system. As if there's only two ways, this binary thing where there's only two ways of doing things, our way and the American way, and we don't consider the fact that there is a large number of different systems that are out there. Can we have a mature conversation in Canada about trying to fix healthcare?
I think Canadians are ready for that. Sean, I do. Yeah, I think Canadians are ready for that because we're starting to see the system so frayed. People are really, really struggling to find a family doctor or get a test done get a blood test done, and heaven forbid you need to get emergency care and you're waiting in the emergency room. So I think Canadians are really starting to open our minds to that. And as you say, it's not just us in the US. There are 10 other systems around the Western world, in France and in Switzerland, in Germany, in Holland, in the UK, that run public systems. And all of them have a different way of doing it. We should be looking around the world to see what we can learn from some of those other countries, because most of them have better outcomes than we do on most of the measures that we look at. Everybody has a shortage of doctors. Everybody has a shortage of nurses. But if we want to start thinking about how we would change our system, let's look at the other 9 or 10 public systems around the world, see what they're doing right that we're not doing here, and think about how we can improve what we're doing in Canada.
When we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to finish up my conversation with the former Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark. Today's show is brought to you by Resurge from Helena Products Group. If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters, and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We've been listening to my conversation with former Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark, from the Grain Expo at Agribition. It is brought to you by Resurge from Helena Products Group. You can find out more by going to helenaagra.com.
We were talking earlier about large infrastructure projects and some of the regulation that is out there, and Canadians are concerned about the environment. Like, I think there's lots of data that shows that. How do we balance like some of the concerns about the environment with things like, hey, we need this project from an economic development standpoint because GDP growth is important. How do we balance those two things?
Well, I don't buy into the argument that it's really one or the other. I think you can make them work together. I mean, in British Columbia, I didn't invent this, but my predecessor, Gordon Campbell, who was an excellent premier, he brought in the first carbon tax in Canada. And it was a carbon tax, though, that worked because...
Oh, you're in Saskatchewan.
I know. I'm not trying to sell this to you. We don't have it any... Well, I'll tell you what happened to it. He brought in this carbon tax. Everybody hated it. And everybody, then we took all the money from the carbon tax and he put all of it into tax cuts. So every single penny from it went back into the economy, into big business, small business, and personal tax cuts. And that supercharged the economy, We ended up with the fastest growing economy in Canada because there was so much investment happening in the world of business. And because of the carbon tax. We had the fastest growing economy in Canada. People still hated the carbon tax, but people were a lot less worried about it because everybody was doing a whole lot better. And people were getting richer. And people were being successful in what they wanted to do. So carbon taxes will never be popular. And I don't think the one that we've got, the one that we have in Canada now is well structured by any stretch of the imagination. So, I think those things have got to change. And I don't think the carbon tax that we have in British Columbia is one that you'll probably want to adopt in Saskatchewan. Certainly not now that the NDP are in government. They took all the money from the carbon tax and they just put it into growing government. So you really don't want that in the rest of the country. But there are things that we can do, that wouldn't there are ways to restructure the way we think about taxation on fossil fuels and emissions that I think could be a lot less punitive for people, because the problem is standard of living has shrunk, people are feeling like they're falling behind, and taxes are going up, and that is just absolutely the worst possible way to make people feel like they're getting ahead, because they're not.
Yeah, we saw politically, as soon as the Conservatives started talking about affordability, it flicked a switch. All of a sudden it changed. And it's been a rough road for Canadians when it comes to affordability.
It's been a tough few years. There's no doubt about it. And then you look at your kids and you think, the way I built, whatever small wealth that I have is by buying a house. And the house went up in value. And I got a mortgage on it. And then I was able to use that mortgage to do other things. If your kid can't even ever afford a home, and that's true for a lot of Canadians, I think there's room to worry about the future. And people are really concerned about that. So, I mean, I would say the number one thing that government needs to be thinking about now is how do we create economic growth in the country? And I think that's true for every single politician, for whatever you come from on the political spectrum. The first thing is, how do we create economic growth? Because economic growth means people can have the dignity of a paycheck and that they can have the security, the sense of security for their own future, the sense of control over their own lives that comes with a paycheck. And then we can also afford to fund all the programs that we share to look after each other, like education and healthcare and childcare and all of those other things that matter to bind us together as a community. But if you don't have economic growth, you don't create wealth, then you don't get any of those other things.
Are you trying to tell me that budgets don't balance themselves? Is that what you're trying to say? That's what you're saying?
Well, you got to sell a lot of semen.
Yeah. Words you didn't think we were going to talk about up here, did you? Okay, so energy transition. We talked a lot about energy development and infrastructure, a lot of exciting things and opportunities for Canada. But we also have this transition happening, and again, not binary. There's a lot of people that think that we're quitting gas jobs today because we got to move to EVs tomorrow, and it's a little chilly outside. If you didn't notice, which is always a pushback against the future of electric vehicles. A lot of work to be done there from a technology standpoint. What do you think this transition looks like?
Well, I think the transition, two things I would say about that. The first thing is when you look at where clean energy industries have really gotten going, it's in places where they already have fossil fuel industries. So Texas is a good example of that, where they are booming in clean energy innovation and businesses, and there's tons of that economy growing there. And it's because the big investors in oil and gas and traditional fossil fuel industries are all there. So they're diversifying their companies, and it's happening in the same place. I think you will find that in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan as well, because we're all producers of different kinds of fossil fuels. We are going to become strong clean energy economies. It doesn't mean, though, that you're replacing one with the other. What you're doing is you're building one on top of the other. And I think that's going to be a good thing. Electric vehicles, I mean, I live in Vancouver. I have an electric car. I love it. But I'm not going to take it through the Crow's Nest Pass because there are no charging stations for it on the Crow's Nest.
Well, there is in Fort McLeod, but they don't work.
Oh, there you go. Well, so good reason to not do that. I think we have to be realistic about how that part of our economy is going to kind of evolve, because I just don't see us being all in electric vehicles in the next 5 or 10 years. I don't think that's realistic for Canada, and I think it could do probably more harm than good.
So not in favor of mandates in like the 2035, all like that kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, I think specifically for vehicles, I think that's a really difficult goal that we've set for ourselves, and I'm not sure it's something that's achievable.
Anybody in the audience have a EV? Or just not willing to admit it? That's okay. You're okay. What's the best thing about being premier?
The fulfillment of public service. It sounds so
really
dumb to people. Yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you asked a doctor why they like being a doctor, they would say that they like public service. I mean, I think most of us want to do good things for other people, and
but you're constantly being told you're not, though.
Well, I know. But, I felt like I did a good job. Good. I felt like lots of people were working. We had this program, if you could indulge me for a minute, where we were at full employment, as the economists call that, which is 3% or less unemployment. And so we were full employment, and everybody was working, and we would look at the statistics, and what we realized is single parents were still not getting into the workforce. We were giving them all kinds of training opportunities and all that, and we couldn't figure out why they weren't getting in, mostly single mothers. And, I think it's important for kids to see a parent in their home working if they want to, because they're going to have to go out to work themselves one day. And we went and looked at it, and we realized the reason single parents weren't working is we would say to them, okay, go get training to get a job. And of course, if you've been out of work for a while, you have to go get training. Well, the minute they went out and got training, the government would take away their child care. They were single parents. We would take away their child care. We would take away their welfare check, and we would make them pay for their own school. And so nobody got off their social assistance because they couldn't. So we said, we're going to pay for your child care, we're going to pay your social assistance, and we're going to pay for your school. And we like the Ministry of Finance said, we're going to book like $1 million for this program because nobody's going to take it. I think that they believed that people who were on social assistance just didn't feel like working. Well, guess what? It turned out we had thousands of people, most of them single mothers, go and get the training and find jobs. And this was the most fulfilling thing that ever happened to me in that job. Was I got letters from moms and a few dads, but mostly moms, who said, I come home from work and I have a paycheck and I can support my kids and I feel so good about that. But you wouldn't believe the bigger thing is that my kids look at me with such pride in their eyes at what I've achieved. And that was probably the most fulfilling thing I ever did.
That's awesome. I'm curious. We still have a few minutes left here. Canada is a very unique country. There's a lot of different, it's obviously very large geographically. There is some physical geographical barriers that separates parts of the country. Of course, we have central and eastern Canada. We've got the west, and then we've got British Columbia, which I was in Abbotsford last week. The Rocky, that's a whole.
You guys think we're a different country?
It is. It's
its
own version of isolation.
All our electric cars and
how do we
soy milk?
Almond milk. I'm good.
Almond milk.
I'll just take the real stuff. I'm good. What are some things that can be done to, and maybe you disagree. I think Canada needs a process of some better unification. Like we bring ourselves together a little bit. I feel we're a little bit separated right now on a number of different items. Do you feel that, and what needs to be done to bring us together a little bit more?
Well, first of all, I think it's great the provinces are all different. I think that's an amazing, I love that in Canada, that you go to a different place and in our own country and it just feels different. I think that's an asset for us personally. I love it. However, if there's one thing that we can do, and I worked with Premier Wall on this a lot over the years, is we should have free trade across the country, for heaven's sakes. We have bigger trade barriers between our provinces than we have between Canada and the United States. It's ridiculous. We are completely focused on sending everything south when we should be sending way more east-west. You should be able to take a truck from one side of the country to the other side of the country and deliver food or whatever it is you're doing in your trucking business And it should be entirely harmonized right across the country. If you're a worker and if you're a nurse or you're a pipe fitter and you're a Canadian and you're certified, you should be able to work in any province across the country. We should have labor mobility. We should have free trade right across the country. That costs us billions and billions of dollars a year. And the fact that we don't have it is not just costly. I think it separates us from one another.
Okay, well, you were in the room. Again, how did we get here? Why does this exist? Because it seems like a low-hanging fruit to change.
Me and old man Brad Wall used to go to these, and I say that because he's exactly both born in 1965. We would sit in those rooms, and we would argue for free trade. And every once in a while, there would be an Alberta premier who wanted free trade. So then we'd have three of us. And then once we had a premier in Ontario who also wanted it. And we kind of got this free trade group going. And, the premiers never stayed the same. Oh. And so people would come to the table and they would have an interest group in their province that they wanted to protect. And they would the whole thing would fall apart because there'd be one interest group that did one thing in their province that they thought was going to be damaged and maybe would hurt their political fortunes. And it was so small-minded to me because the benefit for all of us was going to be big. So at the end of the day, we went in there and Brad and I sat at the table and we said, we are going to open up our borders to trade from the rest of the country and we don't care if everybody else does it. But send us your wine, send us your beer, send us your lumber, send us your canola, send whatever it is. We're going to have free trade in our provinces, and we're not going to ask you to do the same. But we hope you will. We did it, and we remained the only provinces who did it.
Okay, so we got about 4 minutes left here. So reflecting on your time as premier, what key lessons would you share on effective decision-making in such a complex and very diverse political environment like Canada's?
The first one, I've talked about it a little bit already, is all governments, if you want to do real public service, have to remember that we have to grow the economy. You cannot succeed as a country or a province if the economy is shrinking. Everything else depends on that. Second thing is, everything else depends on that. You can't have healthcare and education and all of the things that we cherish that make us, I think, Canada great if you're not producing that wealth. That would be the second thing I would say. And I think the third thing as Canadians that we need to remember is that division in this country is a really dangerous thing. And that all this angry political rhetoric is terrible for Canada. We hang together some years, some decades just by an absolute thread. And the thing that keeps us together is our political leaders reminding us of what we have in common rather than the things that divide us. And I worry that we spend so much time talking about division in Canada now in divisive and angry language that we are making it very hard for this country to hang together. And I think we do need to be really very much concerned about that. So where does the money come from? It comes from the private sector. What do we do with the money? We look after each other. And how do we stay together? It's by remembering that we all have a lot more in common as Canadians than we realize. And we need to cherish that above all other things that we do.
It's like we need the World Junior Tournament twice a year to bring us together.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. And yeah, maybe a little curling now and then.
Exactly. Well, and the Confederation happened, we kind of came together that way very loosely. There was the national, John A. Macdonald having the vision to put the railway, to have a national railway. At the time, the Liberals wanted it to go through the U.S. and he said no, it needs to stay and go across Canada. A lot of people think the Rocky Mountains were the big challenge. It actually was the Canadian Shield, trying to get through that. So. It's just interesting. We've kind of been this way the whole way along. I think social media is an example of a change that's happened. It makes it feel a little bit more,
a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But my government paved the repaved the road, widened the road in Kicking Horse Pass, because it was, it's hugely important for export from places like Saskatchewan to get to the port. And it had been on the books to get done for, I think, 25 years, because it was just a terrible highway, and it was, single lane each way. And the reason it had never been done, I discovered after we'd agreed to do it, but before we'd figured out how much it was going to cost, is that it is the most expensive per foot highway ever built in Canada, because it's such difficult terrain through Kicking Horse. And so you think about that now, and you think back to what they achieved when they decided that they were going to do it, and they stuck with it in order to unite our country. I think we have, those lessons, Sean, are really important for us to remember, because this country has every reason to succeed. Every reason to succeed. Every country in the world should be jealous of what we have. And I think we need a little more pride in ourselves, and a little more ambition about what we can actually do as a country, and be reminded all the time of what we have in common and how lucky we are.
I want to thank Christy Clark. Let's give her a big round of applause, everybody. That was fantastic.
Really want to thank Helena Agri-Products for being the sponsor of today's show, and sponsoring me to be on that stage at the Grain Expo for Agribition. And like I've been telling you all day here, make sure you check out the entire lineup of great products from Helena Agri-Products. You can go to helenaagra.com and make sure you check out Resurge, a great different humic on the market. There's a lot of humics. This one separates itself from the rest of the pack, indeed. If you have any feedback on what you heard today from Christy Clark, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms, or you can also call the Real Ag feedback line. Now, that number is 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.